Hot on the heels of that 64 custom project, we've got this nice 73 Deluxe reverb that came in. It's got 72 on most of the iron, but the power transformer is 73. Got some discoloration to the chassis, but no rust. This is a special kind of, what's it called? Zinc oxide, not a heavy buildup. We'll clean that up. Front panel's in really good shape. Knobs seem okay. Everything looks cosmetically very good. Let's see what's waiting for us underneath the doghouse. I'll take them out with a power tool, but I put them in by hand. It's got spray atoms, probably installed at the same time. So 2000 on this date, 2002 on at least one of these. I'm looking at this from behind the camera. It's time for these to be refreshed. 25 years is a good run for these. On the 70s, they've got a 2.2K and a 10K rather than the 10K. I'll talk to the owner, see if he wants it put to the AB763 circuit or just made a better example of what it started out as. At this point, always make sure the mounting hardware for the transformers is tight. All's good. Make sure the bias pot is tight. That's all good. I know the owner of this amp, and he's forgotten more about amps than most of us ever know, but just in case, I'm going to check, make sure this is the correct 2 amp fuse. It is. Good job, Larry. Aside from the power cable, everything at this end is original. Power cable, the hot and neutral were left the same length as the ground, so it's better than having the ground shorter. Just going to the courtesy outlet, I'll neaten that all up. I'll change the power wiring so that the hot is fused and then switched. You've seen that again and again. Original bias stuff, I'll be changing all that stuff out. It is overdue for replacement. And I'll talk to the owner and see if he wants me to redo all these grounds to chassis. But let's just see if they're anywhere close to tight right now. Especially on the super reverbs and the twins. It's not uncommon for these to come loose. That one's loose. That one's loose. I can take these apart and clean them and retighten them, but I prefer just to make chassis grounds the way they did up to 65. I'll talk to the owner about that. Previous tech did a really good job of changing out the bypass caps on all the cathodes. These are Nishikons. These were fantastic caps at the time this work was done. Sadly, these Nishikon axials are no longer made. But people say, why do you always slag the other tech? Why do you... Hey, this tech, whoever he was, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, did a really good job. I guess 24 years ago, or 23, depending on what part of 2002 this work was done. So this tech did a great job. It's just been another generation since then. It's time to refreshen it. And this is a 72 or early 73 amp. I can tell because later in 73, they started really applying the wax very heavily to this board. This one is before the wax man cameth. Anyway, he came and went. Here we have the early 70s phase inverter, where all the other values are kept pretty much at AB763, but they've changed the grid leaks from 1 megs to 330 Ks. And players often think that this makes the amp sound tubby. It's not the change from 1 meg to 330 K. It's the fact that they changed input coupling cap from 1 nanofarad to 10 nanofarad. So they changed this by a factor of 3, this by a factor of 10, and that lets too much low end in. You can either fully AB763 this with 1 megs and a 1 nanofarad, or you can keep these and the AT7 will behave better, but you change this to a 3 nanofarad or a 3.3 nanofarad. That will make the bass response, the entire tone response be the same as the AB763, but the AT7 will run a little bit better. It's the owner's choice. This disc cap's been changed for a film. Of the 3 ceramic disc caps in the LFO, this first one is the one that takes the brunt of the voltage. That's the most likely to give problems. These 2 often last longer, but still, I bet this tremolo would sound better with all 3 new. And they've got the cap across here, across this 10 meg to tick the tremolo. You can also put the capacitor from here to here. Either works, no big deal. And another little film cap here where there used to be a ceramic disc, 20 nanofarad. I do prefer the sound with the ceramic disc, but the film can be just fine. It's up to the owner. If I move these heater wires out of the way, you can see this 2 nanofarad ceramic disc cap going from the grid of this tube to the cathode, which is at ground. And they did this on the output tubes to keep the amp from oscillating. And that is one very heavy-handed way to do that. I prefer to remove these caps because it does put a slight blanket over the sound and response of the amp, and fix the oscillation by neatening up the wiring and the lead dress and eliminating excess length and what we lovingly refer to as spaghetti. This 72 is not as bad as many that I see. A lot of times there's a lot of excess here. But let's find one and clean it up right now before we even officially begin work on this thing. So the wire I've chosen for this, for instance, is this cathode wire here on the phase inverter. Not because this is a particularly critical wire in the circuit. I mean, it is critical, but in terms of noise and length, it's one of the least likely. But it's very visually apparent to you how much excess there is here. So let me show you what the entire process will be for each one of these, though I'll only do the one on camera right now. So let me actually move the camera to the side now so I can have better access, but you'll still be able to see it now that I've pointed out the wire. I start by flowing some fresh solder on that eyelet. The old solder has a surface which has accumulated dirt over the years. And that dirt means it's initially resistant to accepting new solder or flux. So I want to get that old solder out of there. Because when I heated it up like that, all the dirt that was on top just got mixed in with the old stuff. Then I'll take this little flat-bladed screwdriver and kind of loosen up some of that yucky flux on the outside. Then a little bit of isopropyl, just to clean that up nicely. Then I'll heat that eyelet up. You see it drive the ISO away from it in a concentric circle that expands outwards. That means as I do this to all these outlets, there'll be no moisture in the board in those areas. Then I want to eyeball this and kind of find the length I need. And that wire is covered in stickum. That happens with this old wire. So again, I'll just take some isopropyl and kind of clean up the jacket a little bit. Nicotine, most likely. Amp's almost as old as I am. All right, so let's lay it down to the chassis and bring it up. And we want to say that's about where we want to cut. And we're only taking off, in this case, a little over ½ an inch, maybe 5/8 of an inch of material. But when you do that to every one of these cumulatively, you end up removing, in this case, we'll probably remove up to 1 foot of wire, excess wire total from the amp. In the past, on some very egregious later 70s Fenders, I removed up to about 2 feet of excess cable. Now I've got fresh, clean wire here. One of the other things that happens, and I may show you on another video on this amp, is that the wire inside these cables at the point where the solder is sometimes kind of gets corroded. Mostly on the later ones, which use the really cheap stranded wire, they're still using the pre-tinned stuff here, which is really nice. But sometimes the corrosion just creeps up in the wire and it turns green, and you've got to either replace that wire or expose some fresh wire. And this bit is much easier to do without the camera in my way, but I want to kind of give it a little hook. And I make sure my tip is nicely tinned and clean. I can't really do the pretty dome thing here with a chassis up at an angle like this. I'll do that later, but this is the important part of the solder. The doming, to make it look like it's factory, is purely cosmetic. This is a good solder joint at this point, and we've lost 1/2 inch there. We'll probably lose another 1/4 inch here, 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch here. It adds up. Other places are just fine. Other places you just need a little bit. But cumulatively, this makes for a much better sounding amp that will not need those snubber caps. Well, I'm going to upload this video so the owner can see it, and he and I will be on the same page about where the amp is and what it needs, and we can have a more informed conversation about it at that point. Until the next video, thanks for watching.